Hi.
Hello, everybody. All right. You can hear me well? Yes. Hey, nice. I hear you too well. Wonderful. And I see you. And you see me.
Great.
Technology. Woo!
Yeah, so we just had a house workshop here, so we've been sweating already. But yeah, I didn't tell too much about me, and of course also not about you, so maybe you want to start and introduce yourself a little bit?
Sure. Well, my name is Niki Tsapos. I'm Ethiopian born, grew up in Sweden. That's where I am right now. I'm a hip hop dancer. I dance other styles also, but hip hop is my main thing and my first love, I would say. Yeah. I'm no stranger to Austria. I have a lot of students that came to Sweden to study with me that lives in Austria and now moved back. And I had the honor and pleasure to be part of the Flavorama Festival for a couple of years now. So I've been to Salzburg. It's a beautiful place. And maybe I'll be back next year. Let's hope. In my dance journey, I've really combined the two things that I love the most, which is dance, music, and traveling. And I have the honor and privilege to work with all of these things for the past 20 years. And there was never a plan on how to do this or how to get this done, but it was a lot of hoping, a lot of like daydreaming, aka manifesting, I would say, and going out in the unknown. And it really had brought back so much love, joy, and experiences for me. So I'm happy to be here today and to talk a bit about that and to hear more from Olivia, and also if you have thoughts and questions out there, I'm really excited about that. Yeah.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, so I'm Olivia, as you all know. I'm based here in Salzburg, and I was born here in Salzburg, Austria. I started to dance when I was 4 years old, first with tap dance and classical dance, and as a teenager I somehow found into hip-hop and a bit later into house dance, which almost didn't exist in Salzburg especially. In Vienna a bit, through Impulse Tanz, but in Salzburg there was actually no one doing that. So me and two other girls, we started to travel through Europe, especially to Düsseldorf and Paris, which is the metropolis of street and club styles in Europe. And then we saw, different events like Schüstebu, or Street Star in Sweden, or Funkin' Styles in Germany, and it was really inspiring. And so me and the two girls, we founded an association called Potpourri, and this association is hosting the Flavorama Festival since 15 years now. It's really a long time here in Salzburg, and we are now an almost full women team. We are now 7 freelance dancers, not only dancers, but 7 freelance workers working on this festival every year, and 1 non-binary person is also joining us. And yeah, Flavorama is now really big, actually. Everybody knows it in Europe if you're in this dance scene. And Niki has been, as she said, part, I think, for at least 6 or 7 editions as a dancer and as a moderator. And yeah, that's some facts about me. Shall we maybe start off with the Flavorama trailer to see a bit, some images and some videos, and to grasp a bit of the energy there and what it's about?
Yes, let's do that.
The reason why I keep dancing, it's the understanding that it's unlimited.
Es sind sehr viele Gefühle, ein Gefühl von gesehen sein.
People can get to witness people's expression.
Wenn sehr starke Tänzer da sind, entstehen auch sehr starke Momente.
That part is maybe the part why we are all here, because how we all connect with music and dance.
Whether you consider yourself a bachelor or not, there is something here for you to be involved in, and there's something for you to be able to receive that Flavorama offers.
Hip-hop culture is, and hip-hop world actually, and hip-hop community is something super magical and something that stays aside the reality. So it's kind of another dimension where you can go when you want to escape the reality and feel different feelings and express myself, express feelings what I have in real life. Because when you battle, you just show what you got.
People who are there to express their most authentic self. Or you just see people pour their heart out on stage, and like that, it's also a way to get to know somebody and align that idea with their own physicality and express that, share that. And it's a very intimate setting. Even though the venue is big, it's a very intimate moment. And when things align, we all know it and we all become very strongly part of that moment. And we all know when it's there and when it's not. And that's the fine line that I think makes this type of event special in comparison to other type of dance settings or dance events.
Coming back each year to Flavorama, for me, has always been a new adventure. It's always continually trying to push itself to evolve and not stay the same as the previous year it's done.
Das Zusammenkommen eigentlich das ist, was der Hip-Hop-Kultur am meisten gut tut. Sie sind hier, um zu genießen, um zu teilen, um sich auszutauschen. Und ja, ich glaube einfach, dieses Austauschen findet vor allen Dingen in den Cyphers statt. Und ich glaube, Flavorama bietet dafür eine sehr gute Plattform.
Das Publikum ist schon sehr, sehr wichtig so, für die Energie. Ja, fühlt sich einfach ganz anders an. Und hier bei Flavorama ist es einfach unglaublich. Also du machst den ersten Schritt schon, die Leute sind schon da aktiv und feuern dich an. Und das gibt dir auch die Möglichkeit, einfach alles zu geben. So. Ja.
I think that all dancers feel that there is a soul and a heart of event and everything made with heart.
For me, it's really a festival.
Und ich glaube, ich gehe aus dieser Woche raus mit sehr vielen Eindrücken.
Und man hat halt hier wirklich die Möglichkeit, sich auszutauschen mit denen. Und das ist schon krass.
I feel like this coming together is the main thing. So that's why I think a lot of people keeps coming back.
So yeah, the heart and love is the main message in our community.
So we're back. Niki, can you hear us?
Yes.
But cool.
All right, so that was a nice trailer.
Yeah, I have a question to you, Niki. I would really love to know, actually, how did you find your way into dancing first and then also into hosting? Because I think this is really even a smaller niche to be a moderator in this scene, and because you can also rap, and this is a lot. And yeah, I would really love to know how you came into this merge of those things.
Well, it's hip-hop, you know, and when we're into hip-hop, there's often more than one thing that we are drawn to. Some we might just be doing just for fun at home, or some stuff we might be doing on stage and stuff like that. For me, dancing has always been my way of expressing and also my way of finding myself and who I am. A lot of the elements in hip-hop is freestyle-based. And for me, I really see that as a journey to get to know myself more. I've To me, freestyle is really like, I don't even know everything that lives inside my body, if that makes sense. So when I just go and I don't think about what I'm gonna do always, other things comes out that I don't know that I have, you know. And maybe I have it that day, and maybe the next day I don't have it anymore, and it could be just for that moment, or it stays with me forever. Either or, I find it as a really valuable tool of, understanding who I am, my own heritage, my own life experiences come out on the floor. And the same with other people when I see them dance. And when they freestyle especially, I can read their life deeper and more than one might think, you know. So it's a very honest and direct way of communicating or expressing yourself or living your moment. And I think that's why it becomes so powerful. And we become so nervous before, and what am I gonna do? How is it gonna go? Are people gonna like it? But there's so much more than good and bad dance, and there's so much more than if people are gonna like it or not like it. It's way broader than that, and it's a shame to minimize it to that. So that's something we're practicing. So that's a bit of the dance part, but the emceeing, I think how they both connect for me is that I love music. I love music so much. It gives me so much. I can have a terrible day and just hear the intro of a song that I like and the vibe change. It's so powerful to me, you know? And I'm just so happy that I have something that I treasure in that way and that can affect me in that way as well. It's also when the music is bad, it also affects me a lot. So it's not always great to be that sensitive to music. I get very picky with the DJs and clubs that I go to and stuff, because if the music is bad, it's like, it's painful. But the emceeing also stems from that love of music. And for me, it's another way to connect with music, to celebrate music. Dance, I see it kind of like a physical celebration of music. You know, I'm using my whole body to embrace it and to like fully embody it and express it and take it in and all of that. So the emceeing has, just become something similar, but with like oral expression. And I think I've always been like a wannabe rapper. I think so. And even to this day, I rap. And at the same time, I feel like I haven't embraced it really fully. So I don't always call myself a rapper, but I do rap. I don't know if it makes sense, but that's how they connect for me. It's the celebration of music. And as you can hear, my mouth can just go. Like I talk and I can talk. So that's another thing that connects with the hosting. Mm-hmm. The last part, I think it's the love for people and community. I love people. I love being around different types of people. I love learning from different types of people, different ages, different cultures, different experiences. I think it's amazing and so beautiful. And when we come together like that, like in Flavorama, for example, there's so many people coming together under one roof, and to be able to connect them even more, I see as an honor and privilege to direct the energy in the room and hopefully bring us all closer to the moment, the now, the present, what's going on, and ourselves and each other. Yeah. So the short answer, I guess, is music and love.
Nice.
Yes.
Yes.
Olivia, do you have something that you like to do except for dancing? Because I mean, you're a mean organizer, and when I say mean, I think that in the best sense.
Yes, I like to organize. No, I mean, artistically, dance is my main art that I practice. I also love music, obviously, and I like to dig music on nowadays only on Spotify, and I love it I just gave the playlist to all of you, and this playlist is huge, and I love to find music, to search music, and to know more about the music. Where does it come from, and why did it develop? and all this. But yeah, I'm not a rapper like Niki, and I don't have a second art form that I'm really actively practicing. But yes, I would say my second thing is really the organizing part that I love, and it really gives me life as well. And I think it really is a very good combination to be an artist, but also to be a producer or an organizer, let's say, because you have, for me, it's really precious to get the other perspective. Because also when I was younger, I went to so many events for dance and battles and stuff like that, and many times I was thinking, actually, now as a dancer, I don't feel well treated, for example, or the timetable is not tight enough, or some small details. And now on the other side, but being a dancer myself, you can really be a bit more empathetic, because you can understand both sides in a way. And I feel the dancers and the artists, because they have certain expectations, but I can also feel the promoters sometimes, because I know how hard it is to bring up such a festival, and also money-wise, and there are so many layers coming with it that you have to deal with, and you have to somehow please everyone, which is never possible, of course, but you learn a lot, and I think this is very precious, and yeah, that's how I came to all of that.
How you got there, it was just experience, just by doing it, just by entering an event and like getting to know people and then entering the circuit basically, or because I think it's a lot of work, it's a lot of knowledge you gain. And is it something that you gained before, or you had already, or it just came through experience?
Niki, did you understand the question?
Not really. I just heard bits and pieces.
Do you wanna?
Yeah. So the question was, if you had the experience from before, or was it something that you like learned as you went along? No.
As me and my colleagues, we started to do Flavorama with 18 years, so we just graduated from school. So no, we didn't learn nothing about organizing, but we talked to many people who did a festival like that before. So, and also to some, for example, politicians from the city who gave the fundings. They told us a lot about insurance or taxes that you have to pay and so. So as we started as a pretty young girls to dance and to network already within the city, and also within the dance bubble outside of the city, we had a lot of voices helping us and a lot of people who we could ask, and be it artistically, but also organizing-wise. And that was really nice, because otherwise we would not have had any idea about it. And then it was learning by doing, so to say. I mean, later on I studied culture management because I loved it, but it was the other way around. I started to organize first, and to dance, and to found this association, and to somehow learn it by doing. But after, I studied the culture management, which helped, of course, but I would always say learning by doing is so much better and so much faster and so much more precious, because you learn much more. It's harder maybe, but yeah, you only learn sometimes when it's hard and when you have certain experiences. Yes.
What is maybe something that you really were thankful for studying, how was it, cultural management? Like, if there's something that you could pinpoint where you were like, it was good to take this lesson from the studies, what would it be?
The question was, what from studying cultural management, what was precious for you? What?
I would say the most precious thing was that I got to know some people and also teachers who had a position in the cultural life in different countries, and they were really moving things in culture. That was the main thing, because all these theoretical stuff, I forgot it, you know, it's you read it, you write an exam, and that's it. But I could really see that this whole culture world has a lot of potential, and you can work in this field, you can work professionally in this field, and there is a lot to learn from the different fields like opera or theater or music or dance and all that this is the main thing that I took out of the studies.
So did your study, did your bachelor, if I assume, right?
Yeah, it was a master then, yeah.
Did this master give you more possibilities after, in terms of funding, or?
I don't think, oh, sorry, yeah. You wanna?
Okay, it's okay, I got it.
Okay, okay. No, I don't think so. I'm not sure, because I don't know how other people, but I never write my title, for example. But I don't know how other people receive it. Some people might know that me and also my colleagues, they studied. But me as a person, especially knowledge-wise, I don't think so. I really started young to meet people, to talk, and to more emphasize on the intuition. And this was, for me, really the best way, and still feels really good. And I think, I don't know how Niki feels about it, but I think intuition is something that in this community many people work with, and that is very precious. Yeah.
I was wondering, Niki, since I know that you also choreograph performances, do you have a particular approach to how you place the hip-hop styles on stage? Because it differs a lot from what it is originally coming from the community and being in the events and so forth.
Yes, okay, I think I heard the question. This is an interesting question because I feel like hip-hop has too often, got a little bit lost on stage. That there's an expectation from the hip-hop dancer, choreographers, sometimes the theater, sometimes the audience, on how that will look, and that it will be that contemporary tools and approaches are needed for hip-hop to work on stage. I feel like there's an underlining of that in that space, which I feel is a bit unfortunate. I would love for that to be one way to approach, but not the only way. And so for myself, I have not really thought about, like, creatively, how do I put hip hop on stage? What do we do when we're there? I went with the approach of, okay, how do I create space for us to be ourselves? I went that route. And since many theaters maybe not are used to working with hip hop and street and club styles and what that approach might be, what it might look like, they might just welcome us into the contemporary bubble and be like, hey, this is it. So I'm doing a lot of work behind the stage. Who is doing the communication? Who is writing the text? Who is taking the pictures? Who is responsible for certain things when it comes to costume, outfits, makeup, hair, all of these things? I try to always bring in people from the community, so it comes from the community. That gives me and the dancers more space to be ourselves without trying to explain it to somebody, or just maybe even without noticing falling into other ways, because it's more common in that theater. So I do a lot of work behind the scenes. I bring a team with me that has this experience, because a lot of it, I'm sure as Olivia knows, that a lot of it is about translating what we are doing and why we are doing it with the theater people, the people who work in the theater, or if it's producers or whoever is working with the piece, who are not in hip hop, who are not in the community. A lot of the work we do is translation, translation. So people gonna have a chance to understand what we're doing. But that alone takes a lot of time and a lot of energy. And when I'm coming to a theater to choreograph a piece, I would love to just choreograph a piece and not be a translator and a promotional manager and all of these hats that also comes with it. So that's what I often do behind the stage, create space for us to do our thing. Sometimes it means going against the norm. Sometimes it means riding the norm. It could be different things. And when it comes to the creative part on stage, I try to be as, how can I say, natural, organic, genuine as I can in my approach and with what we're doing. And with the dancers, I'm always very interested in their story, who they are, how they got to where they are now. And I always bring that also into the piece. So they are not just like bodies, and I say, we go left, and they're like, go right, and they go, You know, I love working with people who carry a story and let that story influence the piece. Yeah.
Thank you.
Nice.
I was wondering, what is your personal opinion about this, the commercialization of hip-hop culture? Because in France, where I come from, it has been a very big wave of enlightening hip-hop culture, but I also heard people saying that it lost a lot of its value and a lot of its essence as a culture. And I was wondering, what do you think personally about this? Also, organizing something that is to share also to a large public.
I almost heard. Could you please say it on the mic as well?
The question was, what is your opinion towards the commercialization of hip-hop culture? And the dancer who's asking the question, she comes from France, so her observations are based on her experiences there. But I think it's also a question to both of you, no?
Yeah.
Do you mean in general or in the theater specifically, or just in general?
What you said made me think of this question, but I think it will be general also.
Okay, all right. Well, I mean, of course, for me, I when it comes to the commercialization of hip hop, I think it's nice that many people get to be part of it in different ways, whether they are practitioners or not, whether they're in the culture or not. Hip hop is the biggest participatory culture in the world, so it reaches people from everywhere. I think that's a superpower of hip hop, to be honest. And at the same time, it definitely gets very used and abused in many ways. And I think if we look at here in Europe, for example, we have a habit of scratching the surface a bit and not going deeper within it. It is a Black culture that has grown all over the world, and that is something we often forget, so we tend to whitewash it a lot over here, and that becomes very problematic. And many people make a lot of money on hip-hop who may or may not be involved in the culture, and that I think is a problem. In the actual theater space, I think we have the discussion of like fine culture, fine arts, and what that is and what is not. And hip hop has often been considered of not being fine art. So I think that's the reason why people also tend to go towards the contemporary way, because that's also in the hierarchy of dance. It seemed to be something higher, something more accepted, more professional maybe. And hip-hop might be something that people see as, this is what young people do, and then you grow up and you become something else. I don't know how many times I get that question in my life, so what are you going to do later? So that, I think, is a huge problem, and I think a lot has to do with culture, you know? I think that's what it bases on, and a lot has to do with racism, to be very clear. And many times it's not meant, it's not coming from a bad place. It's not people trying to be discriminative or trying to do something racist. But racism is so big in Europe and in the world that it's hard to dodge it, you know. If you don't know and if you're not aware of what you're doing and how you're doing it, it's very easy that we feed into these structural racism that is already there. So when it comes to the theaters, when it comes to hip-hop expanding, it often touches on that. It often reaches those moments and those areas where it becomes something else and it becomes more about money and other things, unfortunately. I think it's really sad, and I wish, you know, of course, that we would just go deeper and let it be what it is. Olivia, how do you feel about it?
I agree. But especially as you said, as an organizer, it's especially these times, the older you get, the longer you're in the scene, the more responsibility you take, the more you feel that it is really important and hard at the same time to be aware that this awareness has to be there in so many layers. And especially, as Niki said, it also comes with racism. The culture is coming from an oppressed community. And especially me and also my colleagues, we grew up here in Central Europe, and we got to know hip-hop and house in a studio, so it actually was already commercialized, our first touch with the culture. And it took years until we just could grasp the origin of it, you know, and still it's very hard to grasp, actually. But especially if you're in a position like me, as an organizer of a huge festival, it comes closer and closer that people, of course, also confront you with things, and that's important. And of course, I wouldn't say it's easy, because I'm a human and nobody's perfect. And we also make mistakes, for sure, and we spend many hours of brainstorming what is right, what is wrong, what's in the middle, and what decision we take. And I think this process goes on for years, for sure. But I think it's really important that in a position of power, be it teaching, organizing, choreographing, whatever, and even if we all go into this direction of certain institutionalization or commercialization, because somehow we're all in there, but with a certain awareness and an open ear and an open eye, I think we can really move forward in a good way. And there is not only this one right way, but we need to really stay in communication, in the discourse with many people, many voices, many backgrounds. And then I think it really has a lot of potential. And it's not only a bad thing to institutionalize something, but it's also, I think it's also part of the fight, as also Niki said, because yeah, we all go into theater now with dance, with these kind of dance forms that used to be in a club or on the street. And we do that because it's beautiful to watch and people want to see that. And it grows and it changes. And I think cultures always change. But as I said, it's really important to always stay open and that we are aware of these backgrounds. And still aware of these huge problems that are still ongoing and that affect all of us. So, yeah.
Yeah, to add on, I agree with all of what you said. And to add on, I try to not be offended if somebody calls me out. I try to speak with people who might need a conversation about that. Like Olivia was talking about, when you are in a position of power in any way, if it's a small one, big one, whatever, it comes with a responsibility. And just because we do this with a lot of love and passion and we don't have bad intentions, doesn't mean that it could still be hurtful and turn out wrong or turn out, in ways we didn't really expect. And to be humble about that process is not easy always, but super important, because we are stepping into a culture that comes from another continent, even though it's very rooted in Europe and other parts of the world as well. But we can never forget that, you know, we can never forget that. And I think also as Europeans, it's very important to not forget the history that Europe has and how Europe connects with other cultures. It's not always been very nice, you know. And just because it's not been nice and it's uncomfortable maybe to think about or talk about, doesn't mean it didn't happen. And for us to not like make it happen again and continue even in like small ways, I think we need to be aware of where we're coming from and what that's been looking like and how we can actually do it different in the future, you know.
Yes.
Thanks so much. And please, I just got a sign from Verena that Imani has joined us online now. Not to cut your questions off, but we will have a second moment of asking everyone. So now I think we can have Imani on the screen joining us.
Hey. Can I?
There she is. Hello, Imani.
Hi, everyone.
Hello, and a warm welcome.
Thank you for
having me. Hear you. Nice to have you here.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Sorry I can't be there.
Early morning in LA.
Yeah. I'm just up, and I'm recovering from a cold, so I apologize if I sound nasally. I can't help that.
All good. We hear you well. If it's fine for you, I would immediately hand over to you. And so we have had a moment of dancing together, and we've had a moment of introducing Niki and a short conversation. And so the mic goes to you.
Great.
And
thank you. Yeah, so it's a pleasure to be invited to be part of this. My thought was just to talk a little bit about, or open with an answer to the question about what my feminist practice is, and then read a couple of excerpts from the book, and then kind of leave the floor to everyone. So yeah, when I was initially asked about my feminist practice, I was a little stuck, but I think that for me, if I think about feminism as a political stance attuned to a system of domination rooted in colonial ideologies about gender and a gender binary, and as somebody who's invested in an intersectional analysis, then I recognize that these systems are interlocking. So my own practice is kind of informs my writing and my teaching, and it's personal. It's much more just about how I see and operate in the world as a result of thinking about these dynamics of power. And so a part of my practice is then to be cautious about thinking about a fully translatable or understandable experience as women across all differences. I think that those differences matter and inflect how we can understand what women in different contexts are going through, and not assuming a full understanding, which for me just meant kind of pausing and giving myself room to reassess the voices that I center in my research, and to leave room to hear from and learn from women whose contexts are very different from my own. It also means interrogating allegiances to formulations that discount or exclude trans women, or that assume a heterosexuality for everyone's experiences. And because these are personal efforts, they shape my writing and my teaching in ways that I don't always know how to locate, but I think that my own efforts to continue to learn are kind of at the center of my approach. So I'm sharing an excerpt from a chapter that's on B-Girls, and I'm gonna share my screen if that's cool. So I can present. I just have some slides, a few slides, and a little video, hopefully that comes through as well. So I titled today's brief talk, Complicating Femininity, Lessons in Centering Africanist Aesthetics in a Gender Analysis of Breaking Ciphers. And so the larger work focuses on ciphers, so focuses on the dance circle as a ritual space. And I explore it in a number of different ways. So this is the book cover with artwork by Stacey Blackstar Robinson, who's an incredible Afrofuturist artist. I think he's in Illinois right now. And the book itself is intro, 4 chapters, and a brief coda. And Chapter 3 extends the possibilities of battling, outlawry, and warrior aesthetic to ciphers dominated by B-girls from around the world. And it focuses on burners, which I'll talk about in a bit, and Africanist aesthetics as a point of entry. So for those who aren't familiar with the term, Africanist aesthetics refers to, or scholars writing about Africanist aesthetics have talked about the set of kind of aesthetic qualities that are evident throughout the African diaspora in different contexts and are reshaped and reformulated, but echo in different practices. And because my work focuses on circles, I really started to pay attention to other circle practices in the diaspora and thinking about where they overlap and interconnect. And so scholars writing about these aesthetics have talked about them in relationship to oral and literary traditions, theater, sports, martial arts, spiritual expressions, music and dance forms, everyday expressive practices, and more. And so this table attempts to encapsulate a number of qualities, especially relevant to breaking ciphers in particular. And I've roughly organized them around dance, spirit, and conversational elements for the sake of clarity. So they should be thought of, each of these elements should be thought of as mutually influencing and activating. And this shouldn't be treated as a static list, which is to say, there might be elements of this that we see in other cultures throughout the world, but in an African diasporic context, not only are you going to see a number of these qualities show up in something, but they're going to, one, activate a series of other aesthetic elements that are part of this list and some that go beyond this list. And they work mutually. So I think about it as the kind of technology of the cipher. And so it shouldn't be treated as an exotic list. It's not a checklist, nor is it exhaustive of Africanist aesthetics, but it should, and if you treat it as that, you kind of miss the point. I'll come back to this list. I don't expect people to have it memorized. It's detailed for a reason. But I'm gonna take a foray into talking about burns and specifically an interview I did with B-girl Emiko in 2006 and move from there. So my focus on burns or burners captures some of the more combative elements of breaking and are a staple of battle culture. And so in his book, The Art of Battle, Understanding Judge B-Boy Battles, B-Boy Alien Ness writes that burners are in-your-face attacks or expressions of disrespect, a diss, against an opponent that makes fun of them. Dance scholar and B-boy Suruj Abrahamian argues that among first-generation breakers, quote, burning was a kinesthetic concept dictated by originality, musicality, wit, and competition. A dancer might put a more unique twist on a popular step, act out a humiliating insult, or drop to the floor and come back up with their hand in their opponent's face. So burns are typically an attempt to humiliate, exploit a flaw, or establish dominance over someone. And while a particular kind of move can be interpreted as a burn, depending on the timing and the quality, gestural burns are common, and that's typically pantomimed descriptions of what you're gonna do to somebody. And that could be something as simple as, a middle finger to the face, which, means fuck you, or it can be, it's often guns or knives, things of that nature. And then the one I'm gonna focus on is called throwing the cock or throwing the dick. And this is this dude right here. Yeah. And so this particular burner allows us to pause on the kind of contradictory space that B-girls occupy as practitioners who carry knowledges embedded in the battle cipher training ground, but who are also still questioned about their participation in these cultures because of their gender. So throwing the cock or throwing the dick is an especially popular burn. It's as if one is grasping an imaginary erect penis with both hands, as if it's absurdly long and thick and heavy, and then shoves it towards someone's face or butt in their general direction. And throwing the cock can be an act of retribution or a diss, or a quickly incorporated general diss in the midst of a set. And the tone of the gesture is a kind of strange combination of obvious and still at times unexpected, as trash talk often is. And no one is exempt from it. It happens between young and old breakers, as you can see here. This little kid is not exempt from getting it. Friends against friends, between friends and against enemies. And it's a very frequent gesture, especially in battles between B-boys and B-girls. And during my research in the 2000s, not only did I notice that kind of frequency that it shows up with, but that a debate had ensued about whether or not it was quote unquote right or made sense for B-girls to perform it. So despite breaking's relative egalitarianism, it was the sole instance where a commonplace gesture is implied to be for B-boys only. So individual breakers respond differently to throwing the dick and other sort of sexualized moves, while some breakers avoid them altogether. Others don't care, and still some B-boys will intentionally not perform these moves specifically against B-girls, though they might otherwise against a B-boy. So multiple B-girls have told me of their own ways of engaging the move, especially after being told it does not fit them, but repeatedly still we're having to find ways to respond. B-girl and dance scholar Rachel Gunn attests to developing strategies for, quote, depleting the potency, unquote, of the move, for example, by pantomiming biting off the dick. The sheer redundancy then of being questioned if one performed the move and the repetition of an immediate retort that she, quote, does not have one and thus shouldn't perform it, as if pantomiming depended on the actual presence of something. That amplified the kind of ridiculousness of the accusation. And so these incidents are indicative of the kind of muddled playing field that B-girls operate in. I feel like I'm rushing through and I just jumped right in, but I did research over the course of 10 years. The book has literally just come out in October, and I do focus on censoring practitioners' voices. So I'm going to play a couple of excerpts from my interview with Emiko. If there's a problem with the sound or anything translating, I can also kind of quickly read over what they said or what she said. So in a 2006 interview with B-girl Emiko, a Japanese woman living in Philadelphia at the time, who was since founded the Open House Community Dance Collective in Los Angeles, she considered the complicated politics surrounding the gesture. And I'm going to play the first 30 seconds of this clip.
I think they definitely do something sexual. Not like they don't come out right away, but yeah, they even like the little tiny bit things, they will do something like kind of like, you know, pushing their way. I don't know, but they definitely do it because that's they see, that's how they see, you know.
So I had asked her if she felt like B-boys perform throwing the dick more when they're battling. Which was something I noticed and wanted to see if it felt, you know, reasonably accurate. And her response was, yeah, she noticed that too. And not necessarily right away, but they definitely do something sexual, and perhaps that's, you know, concluding that perhaps it's how they see it. And though she confirmed my observation of the frequency of sexualized burns by B-boys when battling B-girls, she clearly didn't want to linger there, as indicated by her stilted response, partial sentences, and half-hearted inference that that's how they see it. With that said, she had much more to say. She had much more to say right after, when considering how things play out in practice. And so Emiko then articulates throwing the dick in relationship to a larger question about sexualized moves in her repertoire overall. And so she opens by talking about an experience where she did kind of, without thinking, use the gesture, use the burn, and then kind of reconsiders. So I'll play this whole clip.
I think they definitely do something sexual. No, like.
Sorry, it didn't change slides. There we go. This is the clip.
I used to do that because that's the only way I thought, like, and I didn't really realize what that means, you know. Then after I've been in breaking scene for a while, I'm like, wow, this is not really cool things to do, like doing like, you know, like, And one time I catch myself doing it, like recently, because I was so hype or so mad or whatever, and I couldn't think other moves that I could do. But immediately I thought, wow, what am I doing? I don't want to do this. I'd rather do something funny, something like not really sexual, because B-boy has like so many ways already, like maybe, I don't know, to express, but as a female, being sexual is not really like, not funny way, you know what I mean? Like more, it's like, doesn't fit into B-girl style. Like being sexual as a woman is sexy, and like sexy means, I don't know, you know, like it could be different kind of sexy, but compared to what they do, what B-boys do to each other, yeah, I cannot really relate it to that as a female doing some kind of moves. Yeah. Like what? Well, I have boobs, and what can I do? Am I throwing the trouble? Like I thought about it. Like, okay, what can I do? Yeah. You know, and it's so limited too, so I don't want to think that way. First of all, I don't want to present myself like that anymore, and there's so many other ways to make fun of people.
Sorry about the interruption. So basically, the move is in her repertoire, and sometimes it comes out, but in thinking about it, she's really kind of hesitant. She doesn't think there's much room for a B-girl to engage those moves and still have a kind of range of expression that B-boys do. She learned the burner in the context of learning how to break. And it lived as a kind of standard diss in her repertoire, as it does for most breakers. But once she realized the literal reference, it no longer lived comfortably. The double bind was that she was expected to demonstrate to show and prove that she knew and understood breaking's repertoire, which includes the gesture. But in doing so, her creativity was called into question. She could not then imagine a diss that was sexual and read as funny or aggressive on her body. And logic told her that such a move would be more readily misread as sexiness. She lingered on the question what to do. And so at a different, later in our interview, she says that for regular B-boys who don't dance and who don't know how to dance, they will come up in a typical way, whatever, they'll do that, and it feels fairly typical. But for herself, she says, sure, the meaning is different because we have different things in the body. So a lot of people say, oh, you do this, but you don't have one, and be more creative and other stuff, but what can I do? And she repeats, what can I do, a few times at this part of our interview, suggesting that B-girl style makes sexual, as in sexy moves, untenable. And throwing the dick became another discourse through which B-girls are told how they should dance and express gender, further delimiting the room to play and experiment. Emiko's consideration at the time to avoid such moves altogether was also a counterpoint to the different kind of sexy that she left uninvestigated. In the end, though, Emiko countered with the very critique law that B-girls that throwing the dick lacks creativity. Intellectually, she questioned the efficacy of sexualized moves, but weeks before our interview at B-Boy Summit in 2006, she danced a resolution. During a 5-on-5 crew battle, the only B-girls formerly competing at this 4-day event formed an ad hoc crew for the sake of entering one of the battles. And at one point during Emiko's run, a B-boy attempted to interrupt her set by feigning humping her from behind as he bent backward while balanced on one hand. But he was taken by surprise and burned when Emiko swiftly turned around, straddled his head, and humped his face, positioning him as being at her service. The audience's response was boisterous, and the applause and laughter echoed. Emiko quickly and seamlessly continued her set, unencumbered by his interruption, as he sheepishly walked back to his crew. It was an unexpected, funny, and badass response that most importantly did not disrupt her flow. She improvised her way around her seemingly limited options by deploying the very thing she could not reconcile in the context of our interview. And at an improvisational moment in practice, in the practice of ritual derision, Emiko physically enacted another option. By embodying breaking imperatives and Africanist battling practices, which I'll talk about next, she made her way through her own conundrum. When Emiko employed profane gestures, they hit harder precisely because B-girls can play off the overuse of popular burns like throwing the dick. When read through Africanist aesthetics, the battle cipher training ground is precisely where one learns to deplete the potency of a fraught tradition, a culture that knows the varied possibilities of the battle, wherein, for example, neither experiment nor stock move can guarantee a win, maintains a sensibility wherein subversion is always a distinct possibility. And so I return to this slide. I return the Africanist aesthetics slides because from an Africanist aesthetic perspective and with an eye toward diasporic Black life, rather than situating B-girls as anomalies or contradictions in a predominantly male-dominated space, they're enacting a set of practices that not only make room for femininity, but recontextualize how to understand masculinity and femininity altogether, rather than collapsing into a gender binary. So if we only think of burns in terms of hip-hop's outlaw aesthetics, the discussion could stay here, that she, countered that burn with a burn of her own, and that was great. But the Africanist aesthetic of blurring the divide between the sacred and secular demands that we explore the profane as an expression of sacredness. For example, African American studies scholar L.H. Stallings, in her book Funk the Erotic, Trans Aesthetics and Black Sexual Cultures, coins the term funky erotics to identify an already present Black Atlantic genre of cultural production that narrativizes, quote, a sacredly profane sexuality that ritualizes and makes sacred what is libidinous and blasphemous in Western humanism, so as to unseat and criticize the inherent imperialistic aims within its social mores and sexual morality. I kind of want to repeat that because I love this quote and I should have put it up for you all. Stallings writes that a sacredly profane sexuality that ritualizes and makes sacred what is libidinous and blasphemous in Western humanism, so as to unseat and criticize the inherent imperialistic aims within its social mores and sexual morality. Stallings instead argues for a history of funky erotics in Black sexual cultures as an opposing sensibility that disrupts Western humanism and, quote, subverts hierarchies of gender and sexuality because it has a lineage that exceeds its destructive imperialist mandates within Western patriarchy, and that is sacred. Burns extend the sacred profane into ritual practice of battle ciphers. Practitioners reject Western humanist tenets of civility and respectability and redefine notions of decorum and appropriateness from within the ritual. In that respect, the extra-phenomenal qualities of ciphering, the kind of heightened experiences, emotional and psychological, that people talk about and that I discuss in my chapter 1, can be captured in the profane too, just differently within the battling's ritual context. Ritualized mockery is another key element, also referred to as ritual derision or insult games. It's common throughout the African diaspora and gives precedence not only to the literal insult, but to the cleverly stylized manner of its delivery, including making use of the profane. There are limited references to dances of derision in the African diaspora, with the primary example being the cakewalk, a pre-emancipation 19th century practice wherein African Americans dancers mocked formal white dancers in a stylized manner that was later adopted to the minstrel stage. Battling and breaking, though, is more aptly comparable to verbal ritual derisions, where much of the scholarship seems to rest. So familiar examples in African American life include playing the dozens, snapping, or simply your mama jokes. Such games are highly stylized traditions of ritual verbal combat. And scholars have written about verbal rituals of derision throughout the African diaspora, including Cuba, Brazil, Colombia, Ecuador, Guyana, Puerto Rico, the US, Jamaica, Trinidad and Tobago, Suriname, Nevis, and the Bantu Congo region of the African continent. The language appropriated for ritual events is rough, insulting, aggressive, crude, disrespectful, and at times downright foul, and is meant to produce comic effects in the participating audiences. Not surprisingly, people unfamiliar with the ritual tradition may find its language deeply offensive. To the practitioners, too, the words are rough, but they're never meant to be taken literally. These games prioritize originality or a distinct style, and its characteristics include well-timed, somewhat personalized, creative, and exaggerated insults that are performed in cooperation with the audience who referees the exchange. Insults are meant to be boorish expressions of wit and cunning that also entertain, largely through humor, originality, and clever wordplay, the dexterity of which is a testament to one's skill and style. So one shouldn't lose their cool, lest they lose the battle, and no one is to touch. Verbal games are profoundly competitive, and they accompany, even those games accompany kind of a body language of its own. And so one burn that I always appreciate that I saw in an online battle was with B-Girl Vendetta, who's out of Atlanta, and she's battling a B-Girl named A+. And in it, she basically pantomimes racking a shot, or no, pulling A+'s body into the middle of the cipher, digging a hole, throwing her body in it, racking a shotgun, shooting her, covering her with dirt, doing last rites, and then does a little dance on her grave, and then she starts breaking, and that was like the burn she pantomimes in the battle. It took like 10 seconds, and it was hilarious. It still makes me laugh. So when B-Girls adopt these practices, their aggressiveness, their strength, and the play and the profane comes to represent how they disrupt assumptions about what femininity is supposed to mean. In my first exploration of the concept of badass femininity, I drew connections to African-American blues women in the 20s and 30s as, quote, physically and psychologically strong, sexually free, and authorities over themselves and others, unquote. These blues women sang of their own pleasure, violence both received and given, and occupied spaces deemed primarily for men. Blues women are also among the, quote, riotous women that Saidiya Hartman writes about in her book, Wayward Lives, Beautiful Experiments, Intimate Histories of Social Upheaval. In it, Hartman explores Black women whose experiences were always already criminal and criminalized because they walked what she calls the errant path, which Hartman describes as a path tread by Black women who refused the, quote, state surveillance and police power that acted to shape and regulate intimate life. Hartman depicts errantry as a kind of counter-logic to society's choreographic attempts to control everyday Black women's bodies and mobility. Their errantry expressed a freedom they were never meant to possess, hence their power in society's fears. By situating B-Girls in this lineage, my effort was to extend hip-hop's outlawry beyond the culture's own historical framework with the particular focus on women. Finally, I also looked to African martial art historian T.J. Desh-Obi to better contextualize my approach to warrior women. In his forthcoming historical analysis of Grima, a machete fighting technique in Colombia that traces back to the era of enslavement and built upon African martial traditions, he argues that Western scholars have tended to misread African diasporic women martial artists as, quote, pretending to be or posing as men, when in fact that perspective was much more indicative of Western researchers' imposed worldview that disarticulated, aestheticized, and actual violence, as in combat and sport, from Western common sense notions of appropriate femininity. Desh-Obi furthers that in certain Central African contexts, masculine and feminine were principles in an overarching cosmology rather than biological imperatives. The feminine principle included qualities like tactical morality and just violence and a ferociously protective motherhood, so that the fighting technique would be considered masculine, and the principles that inform that fighting technique that are wrapped up in issues of justness and protection are considered feminine. So in Grima, while the potency of Grima was read through a masculine principle, because it is a machete fighting technique, one needed to also inhabit the moral character of the practice, the feminine principle, which meant that they were not allowed to shed blood unless absolutely necessary. The technique itself enacted this balance because it used the sides of a machete, which stings like a whip, rather than the sharp edge so as not to cut. Under such a cosmology, the feminine is part of everything, including violence, and is not determined by who is fighting. And so while I can't simply apply or adopt Ashobi's argument for breaking, I do propose that, as in Grima, breaking gives primacy to its own internal values and codes, regardless of the body doing it. Breaking is seen as relatively egalitarian with no division of labor or difference between vocabularies, and that's a quote from Rachel Gunn. For B-girls who train in warrior aesthetics, like Burns, while improvising with the profane, battling creates opportunities to move in ways that are already seen as a problem to Western patriarchy. And despite B-girls' gender-troubling possibilities, street dances that explicitly aestheticize violence and play in the profane are still popularly seen as exclusively masculine, which is an unbalanced understanding of breaking as a practice, and that misses the disruptive or resistive forces from within the culture, evident by way of its Africanist aesthetics and Black cultural elements that B-girls, that their breaking practice makes evident. So, some final takeaways. I didn't want to run too long, and I just read a couple of sections out of the larger chapter. The chapter itself goes on to consider Africanist aesthetic, other Africanist aesthetic imperatives, such as the imperative to innovate and be original, and what that means, with a focused look at an interview with B-girl Black Pearl, who is out of Holland, and had been only breaking for a few months at the time. And in it, I think about and think through how breaking identities cross-cut gender and nationality, and that a danced formulation of sociality that deprioritizes gender becomes evident in their practice. So that they move more towards horizontal relationships informed by the mastery of the dance rather than hierarchical relationships. In the context of breaking, ultimately you're talking about folks who are grappling with multiple competing formulations of gender. There's outside influences, they're what people carry with them into the culture and what they learn in the context of the culture and through dance, and that is prioritized through dance. My work seeks to draw out the radical possibilities of ciphers dominated by different entities when read through Africanist aesthetics. And ultimately, I'm interested in the possibilities for how we talk about gender and understand its enactment in hip hop. Beyond, and at the time when I started this chapter, most of the discourse about women in hip hop was about like the video models in rap videos, and that's it. It wasn't about practitioners. It wasn't about people, women who are doing hip hop in these various modes. And so that scholarship is actually quite recent in the last few years. There are a number of articles about women practitioners, but that's recent. But in this focus, my efforts are to examine gender in a way that respects the culture, its history, and the B-girls and B-boys whose mastery embodies the possibilities of this practice. So I can wrap up there so that there's more time for Q&A. I didn't want to run too long because I know I missed stuff. Here's some citations. I actually meant to, I'm assuming everybody knows what I mean by cipher, but if you don't, here's just a tiny, it's a small clip that I piecemealed together from I don't know, like a birthday battle I went to a long time ago in San Francisco. But ultimately, yeah, this is just a sample of the work. I'll stop sharing. There we go.
Thank you so much, Imani. Thanks a lot. Yeah, I wanted to say before, your book has arrived and it's with us in the space. So today is actually the first official day of our Feminist School. The book made it to our reading corner, and I think we have more time and moments to be able to dive into the richness of your work. It's really incredible. It was already the first time we talked. I felt this is not one world, but many worlds and many cultures to dive into. And thank you so much for sharing your work. And I think we could right away go into Q&A. And I'm really interested now. We had one Zoom conversation, the four of us, before today, and now diving deeper into your research and into also what we heard earlier. I'm really curious, also, Niki, how it resonates in you as a practitioner and also as a dancer practitioner whose path we are going to witness a bit more today when we see the movie later on. So I know this is kind of a blurry and pretty broad question, but maybe you want to jump into this.
Well, sure. First of all, I just want to say thank you, Imani, for what you are sharing. And that's also my answer to your question. Like, I feel gratitude when I hear this. I feel gratitude, and I'm just grateful that you are doing the work that you do, because as a practitioner, we sometimes get portrayed by people from outside the culture, and that might just bring one side of it. But for someone who's inside the culture and to do this type of work, for me, I'm just grateful, really, really grateful to Imani and to people like you, Imani, who are doing this type of work. I recognize myself a lot in many of these scenarios. I'm not a B-girl, but I have been battling a lot. And I often end up being sometimes the only woman in the situation or at the judges panel or something like this. And I spend a lot of time talking, thinking about this stuff, and I also spend a lot of time trying to create positive changes around that. So it's really nice to hear this, and I also want to read this book. I was sitting here taking notes, sending this live link to people like, tune in. Should have done that before, but I was doing it now because it's really valuable, and it's not always so common that it's talked about in this way, with this broad and extensive type of research done from somebody who's inside the culture. So this is a really special moment. Salzburg, know that this is a special moment right here. Take all the notes you can, yes. Should I continue or what?
Yeah, I'm actually curious, like, when you're in battles, like, what has been your experience? And do you feel like, dudes change their approach because they think, whatever they assume that means?
Yes, a lot. My experience has been all kinds of stuff. I guess it's better now, it's better now. It's more, women are more accepted, different types of expressions are more accepted, and also men being expressing more sides than their super masculine, direct, explosive side has also been more accepted now. But when I was battling the most, it was not really a thing. And my experience in the battlefield is that people like to see women dance, but if you are dominating the space, or if you are successful or good in it, they only like it as long as it doesn't affect them. This is my experience. So if I would battle guys and win against them, that would be really difficult, often, not always, but often for the guys. And to this day, for me and my crewmates, my sisters who battle a lot too, we also end up getting a lot of problems after the battle, because of winning a battle. We don't really always try to go the throwing the dick way or trying to be disrespectful or sexual. We just really try to go into the aspect of dance and bring that to the cipher, or not to the cipher, that's where it lives, but to the battles and the competition, where it can get very competition-y and technique nerdy, and people sometimes forget the actual dance and to just honor the rhythm and celebrate the music and express yourself through that. It can sometimes stay on a really surface level, in my opinion, when it just comes to like being the best. So if that's someone's objective only, like I'm gonna be the best today, and then a girl comes and beat them, many times it doesn't sit well with people. That's my experience. But it is getting better, and it's getting more, the expressions are wider now. There's more variety now. It's more accepted now. And all of these things that might come with like feminine energy or feminine expressions, I use that term carefully because I think it might mean different things to different people. But what I'm talking about with that is it's not necessarily a woman dancing. Anybody can express femininity, but it could be something that maybe is a lot of different things might happen as one, as feminine energy is like omnipresent or have this approach. It's a circular type of movement often, if we're going to go into specific movement. Hence the groove is often there one way or another. It might be movements coming from like the torso, hips, and not only have this part like straight and working with your hands and arms, which might be more of a masculine approach. More than one thing happen at once, so there might be a groove and at the same time another groove somewhere else, so you have to pay attention. It's not always going to be served to you. Where masculine expressions, I feel that many times people even point at the body part they're going to move and look at this one thing and check this out, like it's very direct, you know. So I feel like these type of expressions are more accepted now. There's more space for it. It's more developed, and I see we're going in a good way, but people still talk shit when they lose, I guess. Yeah. Olivia, what do you think? When you do this, is this something you see, or what's your experience?
Yeah, I totally agree on what you say, and it's such a deep and huge topic, I think, where we touch ground now. And yeah, I think it's also really hard to tell experiences that I had, for example, as a dancer, but also as an organizer, again, being a woman and being sometimes approached really differently than it would have happened with a man. I cannot even put that in words because it's so complex, and sometimes you just realize that sometimes years after, or now it's getting better and I'm more reflected on that, but I remember when I was a younger girl, there were so many situations, and I just realized them a few years ago that actually it was just weird in a way. And but yes, I think it's really getting better. I think, as Niki said, we have so much more variety, especially in dance, and more tolerance and more openness towards the whole gender debate and the gender topic, and I think that's very positive. But again, I think it's still a long way to go to be really equal. I don't know if equality exists in this, but to at least be more open and just throw away these stereotypes that we all learned, or many of us learned, and still have inside of us. Yes.
I have a question for Imani. So what made you want to write this book, and how long did it take with all this research included and all of this?
Yeah, excellent question. I mean, in terms of writing this book, there's the 6-year-old in me who always wanted to learn how to break, who never had a crew with around me to learn from. I grew up in Northern California, so I had much more exposure to like popping and different popping styles. And breaking I saw in movies or on TV and was super fascinated. And so the part of me that always wanted to know more was deeply satisfied when I started my dissertation research. And I actually came to the project during my master's degree. I wrote on African diasporic carnival practices. And I was looking at an historical practice called Pinkster, which is the kind of New York Hudson River Valley area during enslavement. I looked at my own experience at Trinidad Carnival. And I was looking at ultimately kind of surface level overlaps with hip hop culture. And I landed on the cipher, and I honestly just wanted to find something to cite, to talk about the cipher. And most things published at the time on hip hop rarely mentioned ciphers at all. And if they did, it was in passing. And not because it wasn't important, but because it was so ubiquitous. Like there's a dance circle, it's fine, it's a given. And readings I was doing about African culture in the Americas, there's circles everywhere. Anything you read, they're like, oh yeah, it's in a circle. And it's just this thing. It's just this thing. We accept there's a circle, but I understood that there's a circle for a reason, and there's something happening there that really, really matters. And the more time I spent with the project, I had a mentor who forced me to start, because I was like, well, this sounds like a cool project to do in the future from somebody else, because I didn't know anybody, I didn't have connections. But she was like, okay, well, interview somebody, report back in 2 weeks. And I was like, oh, okay. So then I had to find somebody and like ask for an interview. And I was super surprised because he agreed. And I was like, oh, I gotta find questions. And I had to kind of figure it out. And in the process of talking to breakers, handful of DJs, a couple of MCs, attending as many and whatever breaking events I can find and could afford to go to. Spent a little bit of time in Europe, couldn't afford to really stay, but I was in London and I was in Thun for International Battle of the Year and little trips here and there. I really started to hone in on something that felt accurate, but I didn't necessarily have a source to confirm, which was that in different diasporic circle traditions, there was something that if somebody came up, they would understand what's happening in, say, a bomba circle, which is a street dance practice out of Puerto Rico. They would understand the dynamics of that circle in a certain kind of way because of having been informed by hip hop. They would understand, we hear the comparison to capoeira all the time. And to me, it's not about some sort of one-to-one correlation, this person learned this from this person who learned this from this person. It was about this kind of inheritance of aesthetic resources that get activated and reformulated in different contexts to attend to those needs, but that come up again. And so I felt like there was something really palpable that's operating across these practices that if we understood and deepened our understanding of them, really opened up things that were happening in hip hop that sometimes get talked about as like, it's magic. And I was like, no, it's actually what it's supposed to happen in a cipher. So my first chapter, for example, spends time talking about and engaging the different kind of language that breakers use to articulate a kind of spiritual experience that they've had in ciphers. And sometimes it's a feeling of a high, and that gets compared to a drug high or a runner's high. Sometimes sometimes people refer to it as fellowship. I had one breaker refer to it as Christ energy. Others have talked about a kind of channeling experience where they have this shift in space and time, or they feel the presence of people who have passed away or who are gone in the cipher with them in that moment. And I don't think when people look at breaking, they look at hip hop and they look at something like a dance circle, which becomes this easy kind of spectacle thing that gets represented in movies, and it's all about the big blow up move. And I'm like, you're missing the whole point. You're missing the whole dynamic of what's happening there. And those experiences that people articulate if you don't get the Africanist foundations of that, you don't understand how they can land there. And it sounds, you know, out of sorts and strange, but in practice, that's always a distinct possibility. And it's a thing that gets activated, and it's all these elements that get activated. So you talk about like moving from different points in the body rather than keeping certain parts stiff. So that movement, that polycentric movement corresponds to polyrhythmic music, the circle, the kind of collapse between the separation between audience and performer, because anybody in that circle can then become the performer in that circle, people channeling their energy, the expectation that you know, not only know the tradition and the practice, but that you innovate and be original and have your own style, that you're supposed to be engaged with the music. So it's not musical accompaniment, it is a dynamic with the music. You're dancing the music. You can think about it as like a dancer as musician, you know, using the body in relationship to the music. All of those dynamics are mutually activating. They're supposed to be there. And those are the Africanist aesthetics of the cipher. So what I'm interested in is giving language to things that people either know strictly through hip hop, or they know through other things and don't recognize in hip hop, because I think there's a conversation happening across those. And in certain parts, like I have multiple audiences, practitioners are my audience, students of hip hop are my audience, but also elder scholars are my audience, because I think about someone like my dad, who prior to my research, his relationship to hip hop is like only rap music, and he can't hear rap music. All he can hear are the curse words. Everything else is just, it's a muddle of words and then like cursing. And so I needed to speak to folks who I knew would appreciate it if they knew how to understand it. And so just trying to draw out all of these elements that really help to bring the culture in its fullness to the forefront, because of all the possibilities we see in what hip hop can bring and how it can operate across all these differences and show up all around the world. I think there's a reason for that, and they come back to the kinds of dynamics that we experience in ciphers. So all that to say, I started this research and like, the idea came early 2000s. I didn't really start researching until around 2006. And the book took forever, just because it was a lot to wade through. I was supposed to finish in 2020, and that was not gonna happen as 2020 unfolded. But so now it is officially out.
Wow, thank you. Thank you. I really think you're going into a really interesting space there when you talk about the circle and what I would call the spiritual aspect of it. You know, what can happen in a cipher. It's so exciting, and we never know what is going to happen when. I call those moments the blackout moments. Those are my words for it, because many times, for me, I black out sometimes when I dance, and it's the most wonderful thing ever. It sounds maybe crazy or hard, but it's magic. It's wonderful, you know. And what has my path, battles has been the place, and don't ask me why, but battles has been the place where many times this has happened. So sometimes I use the battle setting, not necessarily to like, oh, I'm in a competition and this is what I'm going to do, but to come closer to myself and the moment and be open for those blackout moments. And since we don't have like a deep club culture in most parts of Europe, the cipher wasn't always available in the club, for example, over here. So I think the battles became that space for me. And in the movie you're gonna watch later, you're gonna see it for sure. This thing of not knowing what you're gonna do, and you just give everything, and then it feels like something else is driving your body, and you're doing stuff that you never done before, and maybe will never do again. But everybody in the room feels the moment that it's happening now. It's not something you miss or you need to be experienced to be able to tell. No, everybody in the room feels when this happens. And for me, that has been the high, as you mentioned, that I've been chasing all over the world, and probably one of the things that kept me in this for so long. and why battles kept being interesting, because it was an opportunity for a blackout moment, you know. The actual pressure and frame of like, you have to go now, that might be also uncomfortable and maybe stressful, also helped in creating that for me. So that is something that I treasure it so much. And I wish that there was more conversations within the hip hop community on this. And I think in Europe especially, because it's not necessarily that spiritually based, and spirituality may not be a part of everybody's life, it often feels even more far away, the conversation. But it still happens that people have these blackout moments. It might be people in the room who also experienced blackout moments with their own dance. And to bring the conversation about that is just really nice. So thank you.
Oh, it's a pleasure.
Olivia, what's your take on blackout moments? Do you know what I mean when I talk about this?
Yeah, I call it the flash. I was always, I'm still keep telling people that I have that also when I dance sometimes, of course, but I also have these flashes when Flavorama is over. I'm diving into this sometimes really sad hole of everybody's leaving and everything is, all the adrenaline is gone, but actually, usually I have at least 2 weeks period of this high or flash or however I want to call it, and I feel like the queen of the world, and every negative thought really is like, you know, and it's really crazy. And I needed a lot of time until I realized that this is a different state of mind that I'm entering after Flavorama, but I'm always sharing with my colleagues, and not everybody has that. But Farah, my closest colleague, she also has that always, and it's really exciting actually, and it's really deep to feel that. And also when you have it in dance, be it in a club or also during a performance, it can happen. And when the audience claps at the end, you could cry. I'm sure some of you know that, and this is really powerful. And yeah, it's really something higher, I would say.
I think when people talk about the political possibilities of hip hop, and when practitioners talk about it having saved them, part of what people are not naming but referencing are those feelings and a sense of possibility and what can happen if you're able to kind of carry the lessons of those feelings forward to different spaces and in different ways, and carry it in different ways. And part of what I try to pay attention to in terms of what Beat Girls shift and change in the culture is a recognition that the space that they occupy, the work that they put in, and the experiences they get from that, like all of that is both like the pressures of the culture, you know, all of the ways that you might be told you're supposed to be, or the things that you have to deal with. Within the culture, you're also getting all the tools that are telling you like, and this can change, and it can shift in this way, and my mastery allows me to talk about this, this, and this, and y'all are gonna have to listen. Like, as much as hip hop can be a space that comes with all of these kind of contradictory kind of social dynamics that can be really problematic, it also comes with these resources that give you room to push and change and reshape things, so that you fast forward and you're like, well, things aren't what they were then, and there's still something to change. But if we fast forward again, there's, you know, one can still say the same thing. And I think it's wrapped up in the qualities that, in those aesthetic resources that are embedded in the culture as well.
Yes. Is there any questions in the room, or is there people who have experienced their own blackout moments while you dance, when the body just knows what to do and you take a back seat inside yourself, kind of?
Yeah, I don't know if it's a question or more of a just topic. I find it quite interesting how the cipher is such a living thing, and that it's, can you say tangible? Like you can really like grasp it. You see it clearly in different events how different circles work in a different way, and how easily it can be disrupted also by someone not reading the cipher well, entering with completely different thing, and like 2 seconds later, people have dispersed or like walked away. And it's such a fascinating thing that that we're building something together. I think I came across the term of building upon things while reading a book about the 5%ers. I don't know if you know. Anyways. And then also I feel like there's often a difference when I've seen breaking ciphers, which I have more experience with, and then when I see house events and ciphers there in how we communicate. Yeah, so not really a question, but maybe something to.
I think that's really well put. I know, like in-house, like there's much more of an overt culture around a spiritual experience, and so I think the room in-house stands for that to come forward is really there. It's there in breaking too, but it's a warrior aesthetic, so it comes through, I think, in a slightly different way. But yeah, I talk about ciphers as an organism. It kind of breathes. It has a dynamic. It could be killed. It could be deaded real quick, or somebody's energy can really just, you know, cut that and you bounce. And it's really, it's this beautiful organic thing because it seems so basic, like, oh, somebody's doing something dope, people circle around. That makes sense. But it has, it's deceptive in that simplicity because it is a very tangible experience of something happening together that can create. And that's precisely what I mean by that political possibility of global hip hop. Like, that becomes a thing precisely because people have very real, lived, tangible experiences of exactly that. And then it becomes a question of like, can we flip that? Can we, you know, organize in this way or do this with it? I think that there's a lot of community organizers around the world who engage with and through hip hop for precisely that reason.
Definitely. Also, when you compare breaking and house, I'm also thinking about the music is different, and I think it influences you differently. House music is something that becomes almost like trance-like. It can be, you know, and how the cipher gets built in that space versus in breaking might be a little bit different, but definitely a lot of similarities. And the way you know that you are disconnected in the cipher is when people walk away. There was a circle all of a sudden, now it's just you dancing alone and there's nothing around you. That's a perfect way to know that, okay, I didn't read the room right. I went in and just did my thing, and I did not do the building that you were talking about. I did not build on the energy that was already there. I just went and wanted to do a good solo, and I wanted people to say, ooh, yeah, And then many times, you know, the energy in the cipher dies with that, thinking just about yourself and what you're going to do. You have to connect that with what's happening. And then the magic can appear.
Are there other questions or comments?
Yeah. This book got just published, right? It's quite new.
Yeah, the question, sorry. Yeah, I repeat. So the book was just published, is the question. Yeah.
Yes, it came out in October. It's just out. It just came out. But it exists in the world. I finally got my own copy.
I asked because I was wondering how, and maybe this is a question for maybe in a few months or years, but how the community, the dance community, the hip hop culture in a way, would or is already reacting to the book and your studies, especially when it's about certain ways or things that are a huge part of the culture. For example, the example that you took with the burns, that you question or you put in a different light or perspective, and not to harm the culture, but to give a different perspective and to make maybe the culture think and maybe question and answer in a healthy way. And like I said, maybe it's a question for in a year or something, but I was thinking even in the small community around you of family and friends and the people that you shared your studies with, how was the reaction? Because I could imagine that it can have very different reactions of embracing it, but also questioning it, because you also go for, you question certain things that are deeply part of the culture since quite forever, and I was just curious about the reaction.
Thank you for the question. Some of it, yeah, I would probably be better able to answer in a year or two. So right now, people are just getting it. I sent copies to, or I'm in the process of sending copies to the main, like the practitioners who I spend time with their interview in the text. And so, I mean, it's unclear. So for the folks who I know who have read it, they're very interested in and appreciative of the kind of scholarship I bring in that they otherwise hadn't had access to or knew about as well, and then some people, I mean, like some people don't read. They appreciate that they're in the book, they look for their name in the book, they like the cover, but they're not spending time with the text. I don't expect people to necessarily like sit and read it. I do have kind of thick descriptive stories of my experiences in the field interspersed between chapters, because I think that there's just different kinds of readers. Some people are going to want to spend time with the theoretical stuff. Some people are going to want to spend time with the stories instead. I presented once to a room full of breakers, which was super nerve-wracking. I know how to present to scholars, but that made me very, very nervous. And what they appreciated, I opened with the list of things I learned as a spectator, an active spectator in the cipher, which is to say, like, it's not that I'm not a practitioner, I don't front to be a practitioner, but I do have a place in the cipher and I have a role to play. And so I think they appreciated the transparency, like, this is where I'm situated, this is where my perspective is coming from, this is how I'm interpreting what somebody said, and I'm open to and trying to pay attention to whatever the critiques are, whatever I might have misunderstood or misread. And yeah, so it's hard to say how people are or will respond, but I know for folks who are interested in kind of deepening the conversation around race and gender, they're appreciative of having something that is very rooted in, you know, their own practice, their own discussions of things, but is, you know, just offers a different context to have these kinds of conversations. What will become of it, we'll see. Yeah, I'm definitely at the stage where I just kind of have to wait and see how people respond and try not to get my feelings hurt. So, yeah.
We hope we meet you again in the future, and then you tell us. Yeah. I'm wondering, is there more questions from you? Anything you'd like to know? Otherwise, oh yeah, there's one. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Sorry. All this awareness, knowledge, I'm so happy to be here and to talk about. And I feel like I'm here because we are here because we want to know. We are aware that this is happening, and it's something that there's never enough to know to be able to deal with it as a community. And I feel like many times, how can I even make the question mark comes into the head of people? Because now, for example, I'm so happy about the event and what everything is happening, and there is so much given to me. And sometimes I just find myself to talk with people that they don't even have they don't even know that this is happening, or they don't even know that yeah, that there should be an awareness towards it, because your privilege is who you are, and then therefore you have responsibility for what this is, and so everybody should know about the responsibilities you should have. And I'm just wondering how, if you have some ways or some ideas how to deal with it sometimes in a conversation, or even how to make somebody, because I cannot just throw everything at this person, but how can I enter in, how can I make them, how can it can come from them to be like, okay, I should know about this. It's something I need to, yeah, to be aware of. If it never happens to you, or
yeah, do you want to, Niki, you want to start?
Well, okay. I'm thinking about two things. One is for people to, like, just to raise awareness about what happens and the difficulties within it. Like a little bit earlier today, we talked about how the commercialization of hip hop, we talked a bit about whitewashing, we talked a bit about racism within that. Some things might be very obvious, but still not obvious to everyone. So to just bring awareness to what is happening and what the damage might be, or the backside, that people who don't experience the backside of it, or the painful part of it, just to let people know that this is happening and to what extent, I think is one thing, but many times it's not enough. Learning by doing, I think, is one of the best things when it comes to this. Like for you to sometimes show what you do, like being the example rather than to tell somebody what you think they should do or could do. Sometimes that's needed as well, to like have a sit down with somebody and just conversate. But it's so easy, in my experience, I see people, when it comes to racism, sexism, all of these people go into defense mode. They're like, that was not my intention, and that's not really how I feel, and all of these things. Yeah, but it's still happening and you're still doing the damage. So we still need to get something done here, you know? And to actually be the example, to be like, yeah, okay, this is how I made my mistakes and how I started to think differently and things like that, and not let people get stuck in this box of like, now you're a bad person because you're doing these things, so you're part of the problem, so you're a bad person. I see that happening a lot, and I feel like it's stopping the development a lot, because people get stuck in like, but I'm a good person, or I have Black friends, or my female friends, like they really like me. I'm not somebody bad, you know, in their eyes or whatever. You can still be a part of the problem, you know. It's not about that. So educating yourself and being the example is something that I find very helpful. And as a man talking to other men, it's a huge difference than when women do it. As a white person talking to other white people about what they're doing is a completely different outcome than when a Black person or any person of color will talk to a white person about racism. It's different conversations. So to find your role in that, or your way with that, I think is something that can be very powerful.
I love that. I think one of the things I really learned about spending time in ciphers is that you have a role to play. You have a responsibility in that space. So if in my very, very early attempts to be a good researcher and to like be present with like a notebook, I realized like I would slowly be pushed out of the cipher because I wasn't in it. I wasn't participating. I didn't take up kind of my responsibility in that. And that's, you know, even if my responsibility is like listening to the music and be in the moment. And I think that those kinds of lessons extend beyond the cipher, which is to say, if you're really participating, if you're invested, if you're in it, learning as much as you can, setting aside ego and actually listening to other people is a really important part of that. In breaking, people talk about or make reference to foundation, and foundation is not only about, you know, kind of certain foundational moves, it's about knowing and understanding and learning that history to the culture, but that there's specificity there, talking to people, and deepening what one learns. And it is both part of how people talk about practice and the part of practice that isn't always named in the same way that like learning a particular move or drilling or training your body to hold your body in a certain way. There are other things that there are other things that come along with that. And I think that the more you learn, the deeper your relationship to the culture can be. And that was something that I wanted to make a part of the book, that this is all information that can just deepen your relationship to the culture. It's not, it can be kind of a pivot or a shift in how you understand things, not some dramatic reshaping. And so if this is something you do because there's love there and there's passion and there's interest, there should then be a willingness to deepen that relationship and to deepen that interpretation and understanding. And I love the approach of like modeling that, a kind of show and prove versus a preaching approach, or you should do this, or here's some checklist of things one has to do or read or whatever. But actually, if this is what you want to do, then you should absolutely want to learn more. And that learning more also means learning about power. It also means learning about racism, not just in a US historical context, which I think is important, but also how those dynamics play out in their specificity and where you're at. And so it's not going to be the same history, but there are people who are, if we're talking about, society structured in hierarchical dominance, there are people at the lower end of that who are getting stepped on. So if you're taking lessons you've learned about, how people not only survive, but learn to live fully or more fully in the context of their oppression, what can you learn and carry with you in your own societies? Who are you taught or encouraged to overlook or dismiss or invisibilize? Because these are absolutely perspectives and practices and aesthetic resources that have been invisibilized, but they live and they're still active and forces in the world. This is why I named my book after a metaphorical comparison to the concept of dark matter, the physics concept of dark matter, because that concept is about a form of matter, a material force in the universe, an incredibly influential material force in the universe that we cannot see with the naked eye. We only see by way of its influence on other things. And I love that concept because we have to start giving credence to things that we don't know or fully understand, might not be ever able to fully understand, but have to learn about and learn from. And I think that always kind of positioning yourself as someone who's got more to learn is a good start.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. There's one more, maybe to close it up. Yes.
There was just a bounce on, you said a wonderful sentence about how to carry the lessons that you get from a cipher, or that like some of the, maybe the more blackout lessons or the more spiritual lessons that you get when you're in there dancing. If you can carry that with you, it becomes political. Or if you can carry those lessons with you, it becomes something that can change and organize and actually become political. And to me, it was just a wonderful way of phrasing it. And sometimes I find it hard to find arguments when, for example, speaking to people who are not in the field or who are not experiencing these lessons, who are not, where dance is just like, okay, it's fun, it's entertainment, nice. You move your body, cool, you can do those steps. And sometimes there can be a barrier then, like if you have to apply for funding, or if you just speak about the relevance of art, but maybe dance more particularly in society and the importance of it, that it's just nice to also have arguments that are very concrete, because it is very concrete, but it comes from an experience that can feel very like something that's hard to put into words. And yeah, I just find myself sometimes struggling with it, because it's also very nice to have conversations with people outside of the field, with not only with people who are like, yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about, to also spread a bit, or to talk about a similar relevance, same as it's relevant to build roads in society. We need it, yes, but we also need arts, we also need dance, and it was just, yeah, I wrote it down now because it was that was one clear way of phrasing it that I thought still kept all of the magic that's also in it into something very concrete and political.
I think the power of it is that part of the power of it is that it's not a guarantee. You can't be like, oh, I'm gonna get that feeling. Like, you can't predict it, you can't control it, you can't guarantee it. And I think that it's probably not talked about as much, one, because it's hard to make words go there. I'm a dance scholar, so my job is to try to put words to something that was never verbalized. So that's just hard. That's just hard. And I think that I definitely experienced people who were hesitant initially to talk to me about it, because they assumed, not necessarily wrongly, they assumed that I wouldn't get it or would be judgmental. So I would, people were like, I've had little experience, and I'm just like, by all means, say more. Other people have said this, and then they'll be like, oh, other people said, okay, cool. Let me talk a little bit about how I experienced this thing that made it feel like I had an out-of-body experience, or that made it feel like, I started crying unexpectedly. All of those kinds of things can happen. They're not guaranteed. I think they are often very shocking. I've, seen battles where somebody did something and they're just like, I didn't know that was there. I liked it, I didn't know that was there. And they're kind of sitting with themselves because of that. And because you can't guarantee it, it adds more power to the kind of storytelling sessions that street dancers have with each other, where you're sitting with, an elder, an OG street dancer, and they're hearing things like, because you can't guarantee it, because it's not, it's not so simple to activate, and it requires a kind of collective enactment. It's this experience of a nowness. All of that it becomes a thing that you might kind of chase a little bit if you get to experience that. And if you haven't, it might be something that you stumble across unexpectedly. And I think that's part of the power of it. So, but also part of the difficulty of translating that to somebody who's maybe just in it because, it's fun and there's something to do. And that's also a starting point. I think most people are getting into it because it's fun and it's something to do, not because they heard rumors about some spiritual experience. Something that happens, and in happening, there's a deeper understanding of what becomes possible. And that is like a deeper insider practitioner knowledge that doesn't get verbalized necessarily because it gets danced. And so I think an understanding between dancers, especially if you're talking about dancers who don't even speak the same language, that understanding because of the dance leaves room to not necessarily name something. And as a scholar, it's just my job to give words to that without attempting to make it some sort of all-encompassing theoretical formulation. There are lots of ways to interpret what I refer to as these kind of extra phenomenal experiences. So even my use of the metaphor of dark matter, it's meant to capture an essence of something that is still a thing to discover and not something that is some settled understanding that everybody experiences the same way, because it's not possible for it to be that.
Oh, it feels like this could go on. Thank you so much, Imani. Thank you, Niki. Thank you, Olivia, for sharing your work, your thoughts, your passion. Thanks for being with us. And we say goodbye for today. Meet you in the future, I hope. I tell you, yeah, we have 2 copies of the book here with us in the library, and yeah, you can order it, I tell you. So we will dive into it. Have a lovely evening/day. Sending lots of love to Sweden and California. Yay! Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.